Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world today, welcome to the new way, where we take everything we thought we knew and weigh it again. I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme. I will be your host for today, and we'll start with a little bit of branding. We are a member of the Virtually Not Alone network, thanks to Grim Grizz and his Broken Clock Tower. Now, the Broken Clock Tower might be a reference to Back to the Future, where the whole plot relied on a broken clock tower. And you never know. We could be able to get back to the future, but would it lead back to here? Well, that's what we're going to talk about because this is Time on Time. For anyone who would like to join me in this conversation, here is the StreamYard link. This is good for the duration of the live stream. And if you happen to be notified on YouTube or through Discord, you're welcome to be here today for the duration. So, I just finished reading a book called Anathem. And Anathem has to do with a mathic universe on a fictional planet called Orb. And Orb, Arbre, is a world that's kind of like Earth, but not exactly. And it's broken into two factions: the Avowed, who are religious people in monastery type worlds, and the Penumdrums, who are the normies who operate the world and think they control everything. And between the Penumdrum and the Avowed, there is an 800-page adventure. The book was written by Neil Stevenson. It's called Anathem. An anathem refers to a service. Hang on. Of course, they're jumping me around when I try and type. That's what happens if you're not in the box the way they like to keep us all in little boxes, separated from each other, but we have figured it out. We are virtually not alone. And so, Anathem by Neil Stevenson is about how time works. And being time, I figured out that time doesn't work the way it does, and that our future selves can do things for our past selves if our past selves realized they needed to be done and relied on our future self to get the message. So I have passed myself different things through time and gotten what I needed because I have the confidence to know that it works the way I think it works, not the way it was explained by somebody else. So there's two types of time. There's linear time, which follows calendars and weeks and months and years and things like that, and just goes ever forward. And then there's perpendicular time, when you jump off this time stream and land on another time stream that is completely different from the narrative that we are currently facing. The narrative in our world is one of two parties, one that trumps the other one because it's got a guy named Brandon in charge who doesn't really have a clue. And so the whole world is a Mickey Mouse construct, and we do better if we don't even bother playing that game than if we get our emotions enwrapped in the argument between the left and the right, the up and the down, the charmed and the strange. But we're not quirky here, and we can do things that are quite a bit different from how regular people do things. So I want to talk about, good morning, Stephanie. I want to talk about time in a way that is a bit different than you're used to. Parallel time is something that happens when you take the narrative that we are currently in and you shift it a little bit and change some of the things and have your consciousness going through the same set of circumstances in a different period. The way I envision time works through the Eliot's multi-world theory, and that pretty much works by saying that if you have a world where you exist and you make a decision, you instantly create another world where you made the opposite decision. And it works on a totally different scale, so the two worlds don't run into each other. But if you happen to diverge in the results of the two decisions that you have made, the for decision and the against decision, then those worlds remain in existence on different temporal regions of the spectrum. And what happens is that your consciousness takes the decision you made, and the unconscious you in the other world has a pseudo conscience that believes that it made the decision the opposite way, and it exists in that world. And if the two consciousnesses never ever interact in the same world again, they go off in a they go off in different directions that are parallel to each other. And if one decision makes a huge difference and the two deviate, those timelines go on forever with you in your current consciousness and the other you in the world that didn't deviate with a closed consciousness that it resembles the character you were at that moment of time. And so, for discussion's sake, I will say that in that world, you are an NPC, a non player character, because you are a PC, a player character in the world that we are currently in. But sometimes the decisions you make are inane and erratic, and you make a decision that takes you into something that is not with the bulk of humanity. For those of you who are listening here and actually getting to see this video, I think we've made two of those major decisions to take us away from the bulk of reality. And to tell you the truth, we don't want to be in that bulk of reality, but we haven't moved far enough along the new timeline to get out of the old timeline. You see, people who were alive at the point of the break in the decision are in both timelines, but since their consciousness is in the other timeline, the one you're not in because your different decision made a difference, you get NPCs of all those people who really are background people, as Dolores Cannon might say. And they don't really exist. They have the structure that they had exactly when you left them. And if they are in their own ideology without being able to think or drift from it, as you drift away from them, you change the world and create the new narrative while their world has an NPC of you that can't change their narrative because you're not really there. Every so often, you can jump consciousness from one world to the next world. And if you do that, there is a discombobulation, but you essentially die in the new world you created, go back to the old world, and pick up the character who had made decisions in your absence, but was in character to your character when you left. So if the time difference is an hour or a couple days, it's not going to make a really big difference. But if the time distance is several months or something like that, chances are you pick up an existence that you don't recognize and feel terribly out of place. Um, that is not the plot of the book Anathem. The book Anathem is about multiple timelines in which the characters are all cognizant but not accessible to other timelines. And at chapter breaks, the characters can jump from one timeline to the next. So a character like Fra Jad can be in several timelines at once because he is a thousander and they are incanters. And incanters are basic magicians who can play with time and be in those multiple things at once. I now would like to bring on my friend Brujo and add him to the stream. Hey, how are you doing, buddy?
Good to see you, Lenny.
I am currently talking about Thyme from a book that I read recently. Well, I finished it yesterday. It's called Anathem by Neil Stevenson. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to drop you off screen where you can listen for a bit, and I'll pick you up after I'm through with the monologue, maybe another 10 minutes.
Whatever blows up your dress there, bro.
My skirts are in the breeze, better than when Marilyn Monroe stepped on the grating.
Wow. How about that, huh?
You bet. Okay. All right, see you shortly.
Okay.
Now, where I was that I was talking about parallel time streams that work from the same narrative, where in the book Anathem, the characters who are on these time streams had their consciousness in a certain time stream, and the character of Fra Jad had managed to get it over numerous time streams. And so things went on in different time streams that did not happen in the main time stream of the book, but illustrated possibilities that could have happened. Now, my favorite one in the whole book is when Fra Jad walks up to the keypad to open a door and types in 4 random numbers on the keypad, and the door opens, and he and the main character go off and end up blowing up a spaceship. And then the main character wakes up back in the spaceship that he has just blown up in a world where Fra Jad does not exist, and all his friends are around, and it's normal, and the ship never blew up. And it has you thinking, but at the moment that you're thinking about it, it doesn't really exist there. And so what happens is you get a peek at an alternate universe that happened that blew things up, and then a return back to the basic universe. It gave me something to think about to modify the idea that I had that on how the world worked. But I believe that consciousness in multiple streams is only possible if you are a supreme wizard And I'm still working on my concepts of time to see if I can work that into it. But you never know, because I might already have worked it into it. In parallel universes, time reconverges when the decision that you made doesn't really matter in the total decision of what's going on. And so if I decide I want to have tea instead of coffee, then I have the coffee alternative in a parallel universe. And 2 minutes later, when I forgot I made that decision, the two universes coincide, and it was as if they were one. Now, the way I think this works is by changing wavelength. And I think wavelength is dependent on frequency. And I know frequency is dependent on time. And so that's where the concept of time as we were taught breaks down. Because when you're talking wavelengths, you are independent of time. And when you're talking frequency, you're dependent on time. But frequency and wavelengths are related to each other. And the difference is the factor of C. That same funny thing in Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared, has a role in E equals h nu equals hc over lambda, where E is energy, h is Planck's constant, nu is the wavelength. Physics is so much fun, especially since it's a construct and they left a few things out of physics that make it so it don't make sense, like the relationship between energy and magnetism, which people like Walter Russell in the 1930s and James Clerk Maxwell in the 1870s knew well enough to build theories on, but somehow got changed between Tesla and Einstein into something that no longer functions in a way that we can make any sense of how electricity and magnetism relate to each other. They are opposite sides of the same coin. But if you follow the current physics that we're told, they're at 90 degrees angles to each other and they rotate via a sine wave relationship. Back to time. If you're on parallel time in a narrative, and the narrative does not reconverge and put you back into the same narrative, you have strips of time that are moving all along the same way. And yes, there are multiple versions of me giving this presentation, because the way it is not necessarily the way it is in the reality where I didn't decide to suddenly come on live stream. And so for the people who made it to the live stream, they have a cognitive character in this universe. And in my universe that I left when I created the live stream, now you join me in being an NPC in that universe because this live stream didn't take place. But it's going to be a foundational live stream in a way that I can't really predict, because I crashed the LARP game that I started a couple of strongs ago. A strong is 1 day longer than a week. It's an 8-day period. And I started with the mass strong. And now we would be in the flow strong if I kept the game going. And I want to thank Mr. Armando Busick, God rest his soul, for being the person who had the structural thought to put this concept together. It involves the Tree-Eye calendar, which I've talked about in the past and will talk about in the future. But that calendar is one of the things that is helping me get out of the time of the collective that currently can't be made sense. It's sort of funny because in the book Anathem, Neil Stevenson brought up something that struck me as kind of funny with his concept of time, because in his concept of time, several parallel current times were running with different sets of characters, and it got to the point where the real time of the narrative was off time with the characters who were in the narrative. And so the information the characters in the off narrative, the new narrative, was getting was different information from what was really going on. So they had 14 people gathered together in space, but the information they were getting from the real narrative had said that two of those people had passed away in the launch to get into space, and they weren't there, but in reality of the new timeline, they were there. And if I go any farther into an explanation, I'd have to get into the plot of the story. And I try not to give spoilers in my stories. Okay, that is time on time for the time being. And sometimes I like to call myself the time being because I am here and being time. And so it works. You are a member of the Virtually Not Alone Network, which is all over the place and allows each of us on the internet who live alone to have other people to chat with at times when we need to chat. And so now I'm going to bring Bruce back. Hey, Bruce.
I am here gratefully. Thank you.
Yes. Have you had any interesting experiences with time recently?
With time, um, I think I think I always have interesting experiences with time. Because time is extreme. First of all, first of all, allow me please, and I don't know whether you'll agree with this, but there is no such thing as time.
I have at times thought that that was true. And in physics, the use of time is incorrect. And so it throws everybody off. But the concept of time works for us humans to make appointments and then blow them off and
Right, but I
things
mean,
like that.
time was essentially created by the church. Okay, it was just uh, part of the population control. There's no such thing as time. We have the movement of heavenly bodies in space. That's what we have. We have the rising and the setting of the sun, which changes every single day, and which creates the seasons, and and that in our particular planet is caused by the fact that the Earth is tilted on an axis and it's going around the sun, tilted on an axis, and that's what creates winter and summer. There is no time. Time was created to get people to mass on time, to get people to work on time. The church invented these wonderful, amazing mechanical clocks, which was the beginning of mechanical timekeeping. And it's fascinating, really, it's fascinating stuff. But but at at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of understanding, there is no such thing as time. There is space, and this reality there is right now, right now. That's what we have. We can
I
think back
agree
to
with
the
you
past, we
that
can think ahead to the future, but go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm
I
yapping.
agree with you that time does not exist, but by the same token, space does not exist. And the illusion of space is a concept that they've given us so that they can get time space into a three-dimensional aspect. Cliff High. Do you know who Cliff is?
Uh, I think so, but I'm not going to be able to nail it down.
Okay, he's a YouTube commenter who has been he had he had a program running on the internet that allowed him to predict future things.
Right, I
And
am familiar with Cliff High now that you mentioned it. I just
yeah,
had to process his name. Yeah,
Half Past Human was his website,
yeah,
and he still does the predicting, but his models no longer work due to the censorship of the system. And so his predictions are somewhat accurate in space, but usually well off in time. And so a prediction that he made 10 years ago is now happening currently, with the immigrants at the border overflowing the ability of the Border Patrol to keep them out in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona areas.
right, right. And he works with computer models, which is how he comes up with the predictions that he does. And I find his downloads very interesting. I pretty much subscribed to Cliff High for quite a while now, and I very rarely miss an opportunity to listen to what he has to say. And a lot of times, his stuff comes out on uh, you know
I've
what's
found
that?
him now on BitChute and on Substack.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And so I have subscribed to his Substack. And when he's on BitChute is kind of random, but by subscribing, he sends me notifications of when he does audio. And he does two audios on any day he travels into town, which is an hour drive that he otherwise would find totally boring.
Right, he's in Washington, I think.
Yes, he he's not in the Seattle area per se, but he's south of Seattle, lives on the coast in Puget Sound somewhere,
Right.
and travels inland to re-equip his supplies because he's remote. But the
Yeah, I
reason,
spent a lot of time in that part of the world. I lived for the last 2 years before I came home here to Newport because my mom was really sick and she was dying of liver cancer. Um, so I came home to see my mom before she passed away. But I lived on Whidbey Island, which is in Puget Sound, north of Seattle. I lived in South Whidbey, which is very, very rural, um, in a in an intentional community with some very interesting characters. Uh, so I was just one of the interesting characters. That's
yeah,
all.
we can't avoid it because by being interesting characters, we are strange attractors of other interesting characters, because that's where we really get our intellects fed, is when we have conversations on things like time and space.
Yeah,
No,
it'd be real conversations too.
yeah.
Not, we're not walking around staring at our cell phone, like everybody and their dog is these days.
Well, Cliff High's theory on how things work in the materium is that it flashes in and out in a birth, explode, death cycle 18 trillion times a second.
Okay.
And so
Yeah,
it's
that's
constantly
yeah.
blowing apart and recreating itself with the time space for atomic movement on the micron level. And so a second is a series of 18 billion time periods in which we have achieved enough movement to take us an inch or two away from where we were previously. and the minds are continually recreated in this birth death cycle, and that everything is a continual expansion of how things went.
Well, I don't think I've died lately, Lenny. And I hear I hear let's just call it a theory like that, and I've never heard that from Cliff High, quite frankly. But that doesn't mean that he didn't come up with it. Um, but I live now. That's my time. I live now, and and in a second it'll be a second later, and I'm just happy to be here right now. I'm not quoting Ram Dass, or you know, I mean, I'm delighted to be on this broadcast with my old friend, whom I'm also delighted to have reconnected with. I mean, we lived together for a little while down there on or up there. I guess it was down there on
Ashland, Oregon.
Indian Memorial. I just refuse to call it Dead Indian Memorial. That's the real name of the road. We call it Indian Memorial, and we lived in the original homestead of the people that had an enormous estate there south of Ashland, Oregon. I miss my friends in Ashland. I left a lot of friends behind when I left Ashland, but so it goes.
I passed through there when I left in February to get to Florida.
Right.
But I did not have, well, I had the time if I wanted to stop, but I had a 7 a.m. flight the next day, and I decided to check into an airport motel as opposed to visit Ashland, because I knew if I visited Ashland, I'd end up somewhere with Ed and Adam talking till 3 in the morning.
Yeah, 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 or Asha, or some of the rest of the hedonists. Yeah, you're talking my people. That's my tribe.
Let's explain hedonist for a moment, because most people don't understand that a hedonist is a spatial geometer, somebody who understands the geometry of icosahedrons and dodecahedrons and things like that, tetrahedrons. And it was a play on the term hedonist, because most of the people in the world are just in love with themselves and everything is about them.
Yeah, yeah. The individual that pulled me into this community on South Whidbey Island was it. He's gone now. I regret to say he's gone now. His name was Larry. I won't use his last name. And I was living in North Whidbey at the behest of another old friend who grew up on Whidbey and had a beautiful. His mother had a beautiful estate on North Whidbey, and I was down. I was down. I was literally living out of my car in coastal Cali in Mendocino in Sonoma County, and so he invited me to come up north to Whidbey Island, and this friend Larry, who didn't know me from anywhere. He didn't know me from anywhere. I still do not know how he even got in touch with me. I do not know how he even managed to contact me. But suddenly I had an email from this man whom I had not ever met before. And he says, I'm starting an intentional community in South Whidbey. I have a really nice property here, and I want you to come down and check it out. And I lived there for 2 years. And it was just completely not so random, apparently.
Well, I have an explanation for how that could happen that is consistent with my ramblings on Thyme today.
Okay.
And that is that you made a decision that kept you in the Ashland community at some point, but the opposite decision was for you to take off. And you met this gentleman on that other timeline where you weren't cognitive in the timeline, but he was. and he and you met and discussed this maybe in a bar that you didn't even remember talking about it, because I know there are times when I've sat in bars for hours and have no memory of what I said to whomever, because the next morning I could feel the response of the bar.
I'm feeling
But
kind of that way right now, to be honest with you. It's a little hair of the dog because I had a friend of mine come over and visit last night or yesterday afternoon, and we had a really good time. But just as an aside to what you have just said, my connection with Larry didn't happen until 5 years after I left Ashland.
okay,
5 years. I mean, I was down in, I lived off grid in a place called Point Arena, just me and a wood stove. Okay, in Point Arena, California, which is that little tiny thing in California. If you look at the map of California, it sticks out on the west coast, a little farther than the rest of the coast does. It's it's you know it's in Mendocino County, South Mendocino, and I lived off grid there for about 2 years. And then I made so many improvements to the property that my landlord came in one day and she said, "Wow, this is really getting to be nice." She says, "I could rent this out for bigger money." So she evicted me, which is why I left Ashland. I left Ashland because my friend's wife wanted to double my rent, and and so I ended up sleeping in my car underneath the River Street Bridge in Ashland on Christmas Eve. Anyway, anyway, I'm just you know, but talking about timelines, you know, they don't converge in any kind of a spatial way that we are conscious of at all.
I will agree with you there. And I think that there are times when we pass away in the timeline where our consciousness is, and then wake up in the same consciousness with a whole group of NPCs who were people that were in that consciousness and remained in the consciousness of the person we who had just died. But we need that to happen to take us on a path that doesn't necessarily include those people. And so I remember one time coming up a hill in a car, and a truck moved from the slow lane, not to the middle lane, but all the way to the fast lane, and pulled right in front of me. And somehow the next thing that happened was I was sitting at the top of that hill, and I looked at my passenger and, "Did that happen to you?" "Yeah, it did." "We're still here, right?" "Yeah, we're still here." And we spent about 5 or 10 minutes in shock. And then I started up the car again, got back on the highway, and don't have any clue as to how we could have possibly avoided not plowing into the back of that truck, which was moving at about 5 miles an hour when we were moving at 55.
Well, I'm glad you escaped. I'm glad you escaped. By the way, it's El Brujo Oaxacan, not ET. It's EL. Just
That happens. I have forgotten how to change that.
it doesn't matter. I'm not offended by it at all. I mean, I just noticed it just now as we're yakking, and I just thought, well, I'll mention it anyway.
Yeah, it works that way. And anyway, I fully believe that I've had other lifetimes in places like ancient Egypt and Babylonia and somewhere off in Europe. On the other hand, I no longer can say they were past lifetimes, because I believe that they could be future lifetimes and that I haven't gotten there yet, but that people who were in that timeline who said that they remembered me for them, it was a past timeline.
Yeah, I'm almost virtually certain that I have had many past lives, and of course, if time exists at all, it is it is very fluid, and there are future lives as well as past lives. We just haven't gotten there yet in this current consciousness. And I wish I, I suspect you feel the same way. I wish that I had more conscious recollection and understanding of those past lives, because I think it would be very cool to tap into that knowledge and understanding.
I think we do, and that's part of what some people call higher consciousness or
Right.
higher self.
You know,
But
we have that. Okay, we have
yeah,
that, but it's you know that's an unconscious understanding.
I don't actually think that this consciousness that we have ever dies. It just moves from one scenario to the next scenario, and maybe not even in a linear fashion, certainly not in a linear time fashion.
Hmm.
But as long as we have something that is a purpose in the reality we find ourselves in, we have the near death experiences that we wake up from and say, oh, that was strange. But as soon as we are no longer needed in this reality, we pass away, we actually lose this consciousness in this meat sack, but the consciousness remains, comes through in another meat sack, either one that is newly born or one that is already there, and you sort of get to jump into somebody else's meat sack and deal with their situation at the time of your landing.
Happy landings.
It needs that.
Yeah,
Okay,
it would be cool if we could get Andre on, on one of these broadcasts. I haven't seen or heard from him in quite a while, and he's a very interesting.
he is another one of those people who lived with us on Indian Memorial Road in Ashland.
Right.
And so we had some adventures there. I think the fourth at that time was Ron, but I don't remember what Ron's last name was.
Neither do I. Neither do
But
I
he
think
had
I
an
got to know
interesting
Ron quite as well as
perspective
you
on the
guys.
world, also.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
He had a very interesting, different perspective on the world, also.
Yes.
So the four of us together were like battling tops spinning at different frequencies. And so we'd run into each other and have differences of opinion. But you can bet that between four of us, there were at least seven different opinions.
Yeah. 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 At least. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what happened to Ron either, but at least I kept in some contact with Andre. Um, and
I'm guessing that I could probably find him by going into my Yahoo Mail contacts
yeah.
because I've never deleted a contact from Yahoo Mail. And now when I go back, about half the contacts I have are totally unrecognizable.
Right. I've got a lot
I
of
have,
those too.
yeah, I have no idea who those people are, or they've changed their handle. And I knew who they were by their previous name, but I don't know who they are by their current name.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I actually had a really I view it as a fairly bizarre moment, uh, because I've been on Facebook now for a while. I might call it Spacebook. And I don't think you're on it, but some people just refuse to be on it, and I can understand why. But I went through all I had like 740 some Facebook friends, Facebook friends, right? And I went through them all, and I just deleted one that has not commented or ever shown any interest in any of my posts at all, and I deleted 500 of my friends. So now I'm down to two. I'm down to 209 Facebook friends, and I regret doing that because I know that I was viewed by a lot of people who just didn't participate. They saw me in the feed, and they you know they might have had a reaction or a comment, but they didn't make it public. And I wish I didn't delete so many of these people. Some of them were really good friends, really good friends. I mean, in meat space, people that I really know, you know, people that I, people that good friends here in Newport. I deleted them.
Well,
Adios.
I found that most of my friends from the past have no connection to my reality. I've had
Right.
several blogs that I've gone from Blogger to Steemit to Minds, and I'm now blogging on Minds. But I think I have 260 followers on Minds, where I had 10,000 when Google kicked me off of Blogger because I couldn't verify that I was actually me to their site.
Yeah, that sounds like Google. I was on Blogger once too. I think I told you I was a newspaper columnist for about 15 years. Uh, Started in the early 80s and going into the mid 90s. Uh, and I wrote regularly. I wrote a weekly column for uh, two newspapers here in the Southern Rhode Island area, and and I've written three novels. I was really actively writing, writing all the time, and I had a website which I have since deleted because things started to get really kind of stupid, and you know things
They
started.
are really kind of stupid, aren't they?
They're just completely stupid, and you got people getting murdered. You got people getting murdered for crying out loud. Just get on the wrong side of Hillary Clinton, and you can disappear. See you later. Bye. So anyway,
I
our earlier, allow me to finish this one thought, please. Our earlier, um, exchanges about Washington D.C., for instance, and uh, the current political situation. I think that most of them should be burned at the stake. They should be burned at the stake around the reflecting pool in front of the Washington Monument. Get rid of them. We don't need them. We don't need them. Now,
can
I
we
don't know who's watching this broadcast right now, but I could have just gotten in trouble, I guess. I don't
if you're on my broadcast, I'm sure you can.
know. Okay.
But I don't pay too much attention to that large at world,
Yeah.
not a world at large, because I don't recognize it very much. But burning them at the stake might be too nice a punishment.
Well, I thought about a firing squad, but I think that's too nice.
I
And
think
hanging's too nice. Burning them at the stake would be slow and very painful.
only if we had a processional where we could tar and feather them first before we
Oh,
burned
that
them
would be
there.
even better. Yeah, they last longer with tar and feather on them. Yeah.
And plus, the tar with the fire might make a very entertaining pain threshold.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And some of these people, like Bill Gates, and I'm going to mention a few names. You know, major political figures like Hillary Clinton and GM Obama and some of the other ones. They should be right in the front of the line. And yeah, tarring and feathering them is a really good idea, Letty. Love it. Really good idea. Then you set them on fire. Oh, maybe
I'm
even, maybe even not. Maybe even don't even tie them to a stake. Set them on fire and let them run around.
I I really think that we need a reset of how we do our politics, and we need a different thing from geography to set people into groups. If we had, say, each profession could be represented by a number of people to a Congress where they represented their profession and were somewhat bound to the way that that profession thinks about things because they're a representative, then at least you'd have people that have real ties to each other being in representation. Whereas the way it is now, whoever spends the most money buys the seat.
Well, the whole
Especially
thing
in,
is completely corrupted. It's completely corrupted by outside money, corporate money, most for the most part. And
well,
all these Congress people, and they're all whores. They're all just collecting money.
if we got rid of the money and found a different way of exchanging value for value,
Hmm.
we might have something that could stifle greed. But as long as the game is whoever has the most toys when they die wins, it's going to be the same thing. And the people who are most into keeping the system are the stupid people in the middle class who aren't going to exist for very longer because they think the chase for money is the only way the game can be played, and they're all crashing and burning because the middle class has no real hope. You can either be upper class and have tons of money, lower class and not deal with money and not even deal with class for that matter, just
Right.
be who you are. But if you're in the middle of the rat race running on the treadmill, you're stuck.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you believe that money is the answer, then you have deceived yourself, and you have been deceived by the system itself, because the system obviously promotes the whole idea that you know he who dies with the most toys wins. I don't prescribe to that at all. Right? That just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Maybe I just don't have enough toys. I don't know. I don't even have a car anymore. I lost my car. I think I told you my Mercedes wouldn't shift out of second gear, and I'd already had the transmission rebuilt once when I was living up in the Mad River Valley in Vermont back in the early 2000s, and I wasn't going to rebuild it again. So I'm like the little old man, the long-haired little old man driving down the road about 30 miles an hour, right? And everybody's behind me honking their horn, trying to get around me because everybody's in such a hurry to go nowhere, or such a hurry to go somewhere they don't want to be, you know. And I ended up selling the car. So, anyway.
I have a little blue Hyundai sitting in California waiting for me to get back under the care of Libby. You remember Libby,
Sure, sure,
who was Armando's caretaker
yeah,
before Armando passed. And she and I have become good friends and lived in the same town, Etna. And
yeah. I know,
Etna,
I know, Etna. That's
Etna seems to collect former Ashlanders.
yeah, right. I have a very really good friend, really close friend who had a house. He and his wife, who was a nurse at the hospital in Ashland, and their house, they were right on the Klamath River, on the north shore of the Klamath River, or the north shore, yeah, the north side of the Klamath River, not far from Etna. And he's living outside of Etna right now because his house burned to the ground. Totally, they lost everything, everything. They lost everything. It's amazing, and I'm so glad that they survived. And they're going to rebuild it. But it's funny. He came to me and he said, because he knows I have some construction experience. He says, "What should I build a house out of? What's fireproof?" I said,
Mud,
"Well, I said cinder blocks would work. You know,
rammed earth.
yeah, but I mean, rammed earth is a great way to go. But I mean, don't build it with timber again, because there's going to be another fire. There will be more fires. They're setting them on purpose. They're
That's what I was just about to say. As soon
yeah,
as
they're
they set
driving
the
people
next.
out. Yeah,
Well, after I left Ashland, I moved down to Igo outside of Reading,
Okay.
and the property I lived on was a gold silver mine,
Mm.
and it was closed. But I got a chance to walk in through the underground tunnels, and the rail system was still there
Mm-hmm.
where they could go in with carts and pull out ore.
Yeah, so
And
this is a real big working mine.
except that it was closed down and abandoned.
Right.
And I, as a chemist, was brought in to evaluate whether we could make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And my thoughts were yes, absolutely, we could make it happen. But the state of California is anti mining totally.
Yeah.
And so you cannot open a mine in California at all. And so I sort of lost interest. Hey,
Well,
give
yeah,
me a
trying to
minute,
get everybody to drive electric cars in California now. You know,
which
that's
run on coal powered electricity.
right, right. Coal powered electricity.
Hey, give me a moment to sign off and then we'll continue our conversation because we're approaching the hour mark. And I know I don't want these videos going over an hour, but
Okay,
we can still talk.
okay.
And this is Doc Time. This has been Time on Time, and I have been talking with El Brujo, an old friend of mine, and we'll catch you the next time you get here. Thank you very much for being here. It's been my pleasure. Adieu. Two adieus. I bid you adieu and raise you another dew. And then we'll